Oh hey guys, CPT Mechanic here, and today I'm going to show you how to go from this old, rusty, crusty discs and pad combo that has been warped for quite some time to fresh, new looking discs and pads ready for many thousand kilometers. Let's get cracking! Right, so the first thing you want to do is remove the cap of the brake fluid reservoir, just turning it off, leaving it, letting it rest on there. And I've already cracked the wheel nuts loose and I've jacked up both sides of the bucky, both sides in front. So I'm removing the four nuts the rest of the way by hand. So it's generally best practice to replace the brake pads every 30 to 70,000 kilometers or when thickness is below 3 millimeters. It's a service item so it needs to be done according to that. So when to replace the brake pads? When it is squealing or grinding noises, when you have reduced performance, when the pads are thin, when there is a warning light if there are sensors on, and when it vibrates. And when to replace the disc rotors when there is visible damage, when there is vibration like there was on this bucky, when there are thickness issues, and when there is corrosion which is also prominent. Cool, so let's pop off the wheel, rolling it off. And let's take a closer look at the discs, or the disc should I say. It doesn't have a lip on, just very corroded. It is warped, you can't see it by the naked eye, but there is warp, there is vibration when applying the pedal. Cool, so let's turn the wheel to allow more access to the backside. And let's pop the 7mm Allen key inside the top guide pin bolt, cracking it loose with a spanner on the Allen key. That's the top one, and here's the bottom one also being cracked loose. And then running it out by hand, just speeding up the process. That's the bottom one, and here's the top one. And the brake line hose is a bit in the way. Shame on the engineer who ever designed this. Not the end of the world, but it is a bit annoying getting around it. And let's crack off the bolt, 13mm bolt holding the carrier onto the hub. Cracking it loose with a ratchet. That's the top one. And the bottom one as well. Cracking it loose with a ratchet and running it out. Running it out by hand. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward at this point. As you can see, it does help turning the wheel to gain more access to the backside. So just putting a chair or something here to support the caliper when it comes out. And both bolts off. Here's the caliper coming out, resting it on the chair, my plastic stool, just to not put tension on the brake hose, the brake line. And here's the old disc off. Doesn't look too bad, to be honest. Okay, let's flick the caliper around and let's pop off the metal retaining clip, spring clip with a screwdriver, just popping it off till it eventually comes out. There we go. Okay, so let's compress the piston. So I'm using a spanner, popping it in between the existing pads. You could use a caliper wind back tool if you do have one, but I unfortunately don't. So I'm making the best of what I have. Does the job either way. And here's the carrier coming out. And let's pop the carrier on one side. And let's take out the caliper guide pins. They are already loose, they just have to be removed or pulled out. Let's have a closer look at them. They are not too bad, not corroded or pitted in any way, but they will be cleaned and greased later on. Don't worry about it. And let's take out the brake pads. One of them is clipped into the piston and they still have plenty of meat on them, to be honest. Plenty of life left. But I bought new brake pads, so they'll be thrown in the bin. The old ones anyway. Okay, so let's hang the caliper on the shock. Let's hang it on the shock with cable ties. If you have bungee cords, they work just as well. But I'm using cable ties as a quick and effective method. You don't want to put any pressure on those brake lines. Right, so let's pop a cardboard box beneath the knuckle. Turning the knuckle straight. And using a wire wheel on a drill to clean the mating surface of the hub. You want this perfectly clean and smooth, so the disc can be seated flush on it when the new disc goes on. Cool, so let's use some brake cleaner on the caliper. Give it a nice clean take off all that brake dust, dirt and contamination and wiping it with a cloth. So brake cleaner and the cloth is your friend during this installation process. Very good items to have. Actually essential, to be honest. And let's clean the hub as well. Some brake cleaner and a cloth, same procedure. And using a wire wheel, cleaning the bolts. If you notice, there is some old Loctite on there, so new Loctite will have to be put on during installation. And hitting the caliper guide pins also with some brake cleaner and wiping it down to get them perfectly clean. Okay, all looks good. I'm happy with it. And using the Y wheel as well on the carrier, especially on the rails where the brake pads has to slide, taking off any form of corrosion or dirt that might be present and hitting it with some more brake cleaner. Brake cleaner and wiping it off. Exactly the same procedure as cleaning all the others. And as well, for good measure, the bolts for the carrier, where the carrier will mount to. But of extra cleanliness. And let's take a comparison side by side of the old disc and the new disc. There is a night and day difference. If the disc was even more worn, there'd be a lip, but there is no lip on the old disc. Cool, so it's time to reinstall or install the new components. Let's pop the new disc on the hub. And new discs usually come with oil placed on them to stop them corroding during packaging and storage. So you have to heat it with some brake cleaner and wipe it off. You'll even notice I changed my cloths. I don't want to contaminate the surface of the rotor. Let's give it a good wipe. And let's flick it around and clean the front side as well with some brake cleaner and a cloth. The eagle-eyed viewer would notice the disc has some form of wear on it. And as a disclaimer, this disc has been used for about half a week or so on the bucky with the old pads. It's always best practice to replace new discs with fresh pads, which was my mistake. I did not do that. But hopefully the disc has not been damaged in any way with the new pads going on. Anyway, we move on. Let's pop the nuts on just to keep the disc flush. And here are the new pads going on. Looking fresh and neat. Ready to be installed. Okay, let me show you a good trick. 220 grit sandpaper. And let's chamfer off the edges of the pad. So it's always good practice to chamfer the pads to reduce noise, vibration and harshness. Even though they are new pads, yes, it's a good tip to chamfer both of them, or all four pads if you're doing them on either side. Just to reduce any noise, vibration and harshness during braking. Cool. So let's cut off the caliper for the cable tie and placing it on my legs as a temporary table. Let's pop some red rubber grease on the ears. The manufacturers recommend silicone grease as a lubricant because it's less susceptible to wear and to picking up any form of dirt or moisture. But I've used red rubber grease for years. And hey guys, if you like these videos and want to see more in future, please subscribe, like, comment and share. And thanks a lot for watching. You guys have been superstars. So greasing both the ears, top, bottom and sides. And greasing the backing plate, because remember the piston will push against the backing plate, which will vibrate and might cause noise or squeaking while braking. So it's always good practice to grease the ears of the brake pads and the backing plate of it, where the piston will meet. You can see I'm not putting on too much. And try your best not to touch the mating surface, the friction material surface of the pad with any form of grease because you will contaminate it. Okay, popping it in place. And greasing the carrier as well, the carrier rails where the brake pads will slide. Bit of grease on one end. Right, not putting on too much as you can see. You don't have to use a whole tub of grease or even a half a tub of grease. You'll just be wasting your money and possibly contaminating the surface. Greasing the other end and flicking it around. And doing exactly the same procedure for all four sides of the rail. There we go. That looks to be enough. And let's take a cloth and wipe off any residual grease that might come into contact with the pads and or disc that you don't want to happen. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. Let's pop the carrier on top of the first pad. You can even put the second pad in, then the carrier. It's all up to you. Doesn't matter which way you do it. I've done it this way. It works for me. And let's grease the second pad as well. So let's grease the second ear. I'm just zipping through this pad. If you've seen one pad, you've seen the rest. It's all the same procedure. And greasing the backing plate as well, because the caliper does push against the backing plate. Not the piston on the side, the caliper does. And let's pop the brake pad into the carrier, making sure it slides in and clicks in perfectly fine. There we go, perfectly seated. Carrier slides nicely with the help of a bit of grease. And let's grease the guide pins as well, very important. If you don't do this, the guide pins might wedge itself and the carrier might not slide in future. It might get stuck, which means you're essentially braking with one brake pad, which leads to uneven brake pad wear. So very important, clean and grease your guide pins before slotting them in. And for the dirty minds on there, that wasn't a play on words. I'm not talking about anything else except guide pins. Yeah, but we move on. Okay. Let's grease the second guide pin. Doing exactly the same as on the first one. And be very careful not to get any grease on the threads as I have. Just try to wipe away any grease on the threads as far as possible. And then slot the second guide pin into its home as well. Cool. So let's just quickly tighten up the guide pins with the Allen key again. Stupid brake hose is again in the way. Allen key keeps popping out. And then dipping them up as well. That's the first one. And here's the second one being dipped up too. I will tighten them again later on. Don't worry about it. And then let's turn the wheel again to create more space at the back. And here is the thread lock going onto the bolts, holding the carrier onto the hub. The bolts were taken off with thread lock, and I'm putting thread lock on once again to make sure they don't come loose and fall off by accident. Cool, so let's pop the caliper with the new pads onto the disc, the fresh disc, lining up the bolt holes and putting the bolt inside the carrier, tightening it by hand, making sure the holes line up and the threads line up. Please don't use an impact wrench. If you do this now, you will probably strip the threads, and that's a bad day at the office. So putting thread locker on the bottom bolt as well, tightening in by hand, and then running it the rest of the way in with the socket and extension. Just zipping through it. That's the bottom one somewhat tight. And doing the top one as well. Cool. So for the nerds out there, the torque spec is 90 Newton meters. 90. Put the force on that one. Because I'm just tightening it by hand. Making sure it's very tight, reasonably tight. And then last clean on the disc with some brake cleaner and the rag. In case I missed any grease on the disc, the front of the disc. It looks spick and span. And let's do the backside as well, just in case. Wiping it with a rag or cloth. Cool, everything looks good. Everything looks clean. And let's pop on the spring clip. Sometimes these can be a mission to get back on. The help of pliers or a screwdriver to pop it back in place might help you. In my case, mine was not too bad. It popped in relatively easily. There we go. Ah, almost in. Let's just move the carrier a bit, slide it, create a bit more room. Cool, and there the spring clip pops into place. And making sure it sits flush. Couple of light taps with the hammer. Seat it nicely. And let's pump the brake pedal a bit. Here you can see the caliper compressing and the pads compressing as well. The pedal will be soft at first, but as you keep pumping it will be hard or get hard. That's what she said. And there you can see, with each pump, the caliper compresses. And there you are braking, essentially you're braking the pads and discs. So just turning the rotor, making sure it spins freely and is not bound in any way, shape or form. And popping the cap back on the reservoir. You should do this after your second disc and pads have been completed. So removing the two nuts again, turning them out by hand because it's time to put the wheel back on. Okay, so let's pop the wheel back on. With a bit of difficulty it eventually gets on. And let's put the nuts on, starting the threads by hand. And guys, this is the bedding in process, so a quick summary. Driving your vehicle for a few times, braking, but not coming to a complete stop, and not using all the brake force. This will make sure the new pads and the new discs are mated perfectly and seated perfectly as well, which will ensure longevity with your brakes. So bedding in process is quite vital. You can always Google it if you want to know a bit more. Cool, so let's take the bucket off the jack stands and lowering it down as well. Taking the jack out, making sure the nuts are very tight, all four of them. Right, let's put the wheel cover back on, and afterwards take your bucket out for a spin and start the bedding in process. Guys, good luck, hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, cheers, keep well.